The room was full of light but felt cold, silent in a way that made sound itself seem like a stranger. The air shimmered with a heavy scent of sterilized perfection, and behind glass displays floated living beings. Each one cataloged, categorized, tagged with a price. Her pod was on the end, near the emergency ejection chute cheap seating for the unsellable. She was called Lot 92 Delta, though that wasn't her name. Her skin was the hue of burnished copper, and her eyes reflected galaxies no one cared to visit. She had not spoken since the capture, not since the chains of neural dampeners curled around her spinal stem like vines choking an ancient tree. Silence was her defiance. The merchants called her broken. The audience called her exotic. But deep inside, buried beneath layers of numb obedience and aching memory, she waited. She had been stolen from her people, from a world where stars wept, and rivers sang her name, dragged into the belly of a galaxy that measured worth and trade weight and subjugation. Around her, the auction bloomed like a ritual, with sharp tongues and twisted translations haggling over sentient lives. But then, through the shimmering veil of the observation deck, a human arrived, unexpected, uninvited, unknown. His face was worn by wind and sun, a traveler's face, yet his eyes moved differently. They didn't scan for value. They searched for something else. When he stopped at her pod and tilted his head, the auctioneer snapped, "She's defective, doesn't speak, lost use of her frontal core, but the form's intact, pristine for display, training, or service." The words made her stomach twist, but she didn't flinch. "Not anymore. Price?" The human asked softly, though his tone held no desire. Just observation, just thought. 87,000 credits, with override ownership protocol installed. Choose now, others are waiting. There was something in his stance then, something that shifted like a cloud torn by sudden wind. He leaned closer to the glass, hand pressed against it, eyes locking with hers through layers of containment. She should have looked away, but didn't. In that moment, her fingers twitched, tiny, unseen by most, but he saw. And smiled, not the smile of victory, but of quiet understanding. Then he turned away, not to buy her, but to speak to the auction floor itself. "She's not yours to sell," he said. "She chooses. Not you." Laughter followed, harsh and metallic, until the auctioneer snarled, "And who are you to question the rights of exchange?" He didn't answer, just stepped forward, pulled out something ancient, a handwritten card, a legal artifact from the early colonies. And on it, etched in fading ink, was a law forgotten by most: sentient autonomy rights. It was a loophole, a ghost rule, but still binding in this system. Murmurs rippled like wind through grass. She blinked, slowly, as if the fog in her mind began to peel back. No one had spoken for her in so long she had forgotten how to feel disbelief. But it was there now, tasting like sunlight after 1,000 cold nights. The auction paused, systems queried. Security buzzed, her pod dimmed. And in that strange stillness before law and greed clashed in protocol firewalls, she turned her face toward the man again and blinked once. And her world, that meant yes, asterisk, he should have walked away. Every sensor in the room buzzed like insects disturbed from a nest. The air grew sharp with the static of scrutiny as the auction house recalibrated protocols, trying to swallow his defiance in layers of bureaucracy and threat. But the human Kellen, though she didn't know his name yet, stood still, as if rooted to the moment. A quiet man, not dressed like a revolutionary, but rather like someone who'd walked too far through too many dust-covered colonies. The kind who had seen the worst and still dared to expect better. He stared at her pod with eyes that did not flinch, even when the auctioneer approached with guards armored in polished chrome and synthetic pride. "You've interfered in sovereign trade." The auctioneer hissed, all polished civility lost. Behind cracked teeth. "This species was cleared for nonverbal utility. There are no records of autonomy registrations. Your claim is invalid." Kellen raised a brow, not in arrogance, but with the slow weight of someone who'd spent years watching power distort itself into righteousness. "Then why did she respond?" He asked. "You said she was broken. She moved. She answered me. That makes her sentient, and by the second treaty of Iorides' core, that means your sale is null." The guards tensed, hands resting on weapons not meant to kill, but to paralyze and punish. Yet Kellen didn't back down. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a slate, flicking to a slow, flickering video. Grainy footage from a desert moon. A girl now, a being, glowing softly in low gravity, raising a hand to touch the stars. Her. It was her. A younger version, perhaps freer, her hair longer and eyes wide with wonder. This is from 8 years ago. A planetary envoy shot it during first contact. She was teaching children how to harmonize crystal tones. Not a slave, not a product, a teacher, a soul. The auctioneer sneered, trying to laugh it off, but the crowd had shifted. Curious eyes turned from their shopping to their conscience. A few even stepped back, as if realizing they'd been standing on sacred ground with muddy boots. Kellen didn't wait for permission. He moved toward the pod, his steps slow and measured, knowing any wrong move could trigger automated defenses. But the guards didn't stop him. Perhaps they hesitated. Perhaps they, too, felt the change in the air. Or perhaps it was because she had begun to move again, fingers brushing against the glass, breath fogging the inner seal in gentle patterns. He reached her and whispered, "I won't take you. I'm not here to own. But if you want to come with me, I'll get you out." She didn't answer in words. Not yet. But her hand met his through the glass, her palm pressing into the invisible barrier like a promise. For a moment, it was as if the world around them had dimmed, like a theater waiting for a scene to unfold. And then the auctioneer barked a command. Security. Override lockdown, seize the human for obstruction. Chaos erupted like lightning striking still water. The glass hissed as her pod sealed further, oxygen purging to suppress any rebellious action, but Kellen didn't flee. Instead, he opened his arms slowly, as if to shield her with nothing but flesh and defiance. "You want her?" he shouted. As the guards closed in, "You'll have to explain to the entire Galactic Council why you smothered a sentient being under Treaty Code 7. The threat was reckless, dangerous, but it was real. Cameras caught everything. The Council might not care often, but scandals had teeth." The guards froze. Not out of fear of him, but of the headlines his body would create. The auctioneer's face twisted in rage, but in the end, he snapped his fingers and waved them off. "Take them both," he growled. "We'll sort it in private." They were led, not to prison, but to a small holding room made of polished steel and buzzing surveillance. Kellen sat beside her pod, watching her eyes slowly come alive again. Still no words, but that wasn't needed. Not yet. He leaned close, voice quiet. "I'm Kellen. I've got a ship hidden in the lower docks. If we get one chance, we'll take it, but only if you want to." Inside the pod, her lips parted, not to speak, but to hum, a small trembling note, a lullaby from a world long stolen. And though Kellen didn't understand the words, he felt the meaning in his bones. "I am awake. I am choosing." The door clicked behind him, a warning, but he smiled anyway. Because for the first time since he had wandered into that cursed auction house, he wasn't just trying to rescue someone. He was part of something sacred, something worth fighting for. The silence between them was no longer empty. It had shape, it had music, it had weight. Kellen sat cross-legged on the floor of the holding room, one hand resting loosely on the cold metal near her pod. She lay inside it, not quite curled, not quite resting, watching him with those deep eyes that now shimmered like water rippling under starlight. Hours had passed. Maybe more. Time blurred when no clocks ticked and the air recycling units sighed like sleeping beasts. Neither of them spoke. Not because they couldn't, but because the silence was finally theirs to choose. And in that sacred pause, something invisible passed between them. Kellen had been through many worlds. He had buried crewmates on planets whose names he never learned, seen cities burning in the name of peace, watched the cold efficiency of commerce crush things that breathed and sang. But this being before him reminded him of what he thought he had lost, the beauty of quiet resilience. She had been taken, silenced, caged, and yet she did not break. Instead, she waited, not for rescue, but for recognition. And now, with every breath, every look, she was daring him not to turn away. He reached into his bag again, slower this time, and pulled out a small, battered device, a harmonizer. He placed it on the floor between them and tapped it once. A low, humming note echoed through the room, soft and pure. It drifted into the space like a whisper, searching for response. He said nothing, just listened, a pause. Then a second note answered, this one not from the device but from her lips, barely. A breath above a whisper. Her voice was damaged, dry from silence and oxygen control, but the sound carried with it centuries of culture, grief, and dignity. She hummed again, a different tone, and the harmonizer adapted, echoed her, matched her. It became their language. Kellen closed his eyes and let the music flow between them. He didn't understand the meaning of the notes, not in any academic way, but his heart translated. It was a story, her story. A child on a luminous hill, learning to sing the stones awake. A people who spoke in melody and memory. A raid, fire, shackles, silence, loneliness so deep it became a second skin. She shared it all with him, not in words, but in sound. And when the last note faded, her eyes glistened, not from sorrow, but from release. She had spoken, finally, and someone had heard. Kellen tapped the harmonizer again, adding his own note. It was awkward, off-key. He smiled sheepishly, and she tilted her head in something close to amusement. He tried again, better, then another, and another. Soon, they built a melody together, him learning her language, her adjusting to his. A strange duet of two worlds finding the beat of the other. It was imperfect. It was beautiful. Then came the moment that stole his breath. She pressed her hand to the glass again, and this time, the interface inside the pod responded. The neural dampeners flickered. A diagnostic code ran across her skin like silver fire. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, her voice, hoarse and broken, emerged. I was called Elian. It wasn't much, just a name. But the way she said it, it cracked something open inside him. A name wasn't just identification. It was memory, identity. It was a flag planted in the ground of your soul that shouted, I am still here, Elian, he repeated softly, reverently. She looked at him, more curious now. Kellen, she whispered back. His name on her lips felt like it belonged to something bigger than a man, something rooted in defiance and connection. He felt it deep in his chest, not love, not yet, but a bond. One forged not through blood or war, but through witness. Through trust. And in that flickering, tender moment, a soft alarm hummed overhead. Just one pulse, enough to warn. Enough to remind them that their time was not infinite. That outside the room, others were watching. Planning. Kellen stood and leaned close to the pod. When we get out, he said quietly, I'll take you anywhere. But if you want to go home, I'll help you find it. Even if it doesn't exist anymore, you deserve to choose. Elian blinked slowly, then nodded, a real nod. No hesitation. Her hand drifted again to the harmonizer and tapped a final note steady, strong and pure. The lights above flickered once. A camera moved. The next move was coming, but now they would face it together. The door did not open with noise. A hiss-like breath held too long, sliding into shadow as two figures entered silent, cloaked in the polished black of corporate diplomacy, not guards, not soldiers, bureaucrats, and somehow that chilled Kellen more. He stood instinctively, placing himself between the pod and their gaze, his shoulders tight with readiness, but they did not reach for weapons. They reached for data. We've reviewed your claim, the taller one said, voice as smooth as oil. No introduction, no gesture of peace. The auction was in violation of Treaty Code 7, Clause 16, Paragraph 4. Sentience established, sale voided, you are to be released. Kellen narrowed his eyes. Too easy. And her? The second figure, shorter and older, wore a lens over one eye that flickered with biometric readings as he looked at Elian's pod. Temporary release into your custody, pending neural decompression and verification of cognitive agency. You will sign full liability contracts, of course, and you are prohibited from engaging in any external broadcast until her species status is updated. Kellen's breath caught. That last word, updated, dripped with something dark. A quiet kind of violence, bureaucratic extinction, reclassification. The same system that had dragged her into a cage now sought to erase the trail. He took a step forward. What was her status before? The taller one hesitated. Just for a second, then answered too smoothly. Unclassified salvage from a fallen world. No active representatives, no embassies, no protest. Elian sat upright now inside the pod, her eyes sharp. Not glowing, not angry, just aware. Awake in a way that pierced. Through all their language and masks, she was listening and understanding. And she remembered. Kellen asked quietly, You said fallen world? Was that natural? The room shifted. The taller one turned toward a wall, as if admiring the steel. That information is sealed under planetary containment protocols. We are not authorized to confirm the status of pre-contact civilizations. Try me, Kellen said, and then the older one exhaled. Not with frustration, with guilt. There was an intervention. His voice had lost the polish now, drifting into human weariness. 6 years ago, a mining initiative discovered crystalline harmonics beneath her planet's crust, highly valuable, energy efficient. But the frequencies, they were alive, Elian rasped suddenly, her voice breaking through like thunder beneath still water. The song of the mountains, we didn't mind them, we listened. They held memories, stories. My people were their guardians. We were not primitive, we were keepers. The pod hissed again. Her body shook with effort, but she pushed herself forward, pressing against the glass. Her eyes didn't shine with tears. They burned. And you shattered them. You silenced our mountains and called us salvage. The bureaucrats didn't move. They didn't need to. Their silence was answer enough. Kellen felt fury rise in his throat, not the kind that screamed or punched, but the colder, deeper fury of betrayal. Of systems pretending to be neutral while feasting on the blood of the voiceless. How many others? He asked. How many of her people were taken? The older man closed his eye. 26 known survivors. All in holding facilities. Auctions or research? Elian's hands curled into fists. Kellen stepped closer to her pod, barely containing the pulse in his jaw. Where? No answer. I'm not asking, he said, voice low. I'm done asking. The bureaucrats stared at him. And then the taller one, with a flick of his sleeve, revealed a small disk and dropped it onto the table. Coordinates. Limited access window. After that, this data will be erased and the operation denied. Kellen reached for the disk, but Elian stopped him with a glance. No, she said. It must be more than rescue. It must be witnessed. Her voice, though ragged, carried the weight of ceremony. What they did to my world will be buried if we stay silent. I don't want vengeance. I want truth. I want the stars to remember. U.S. Kellen met her gaze, and in it, he saw something that went beyond sorrow or survival. He saw purpose. A vow that had lived inside her through chains and silence. And he knew, without question, that this wasn't just about freedom. It was about memory. He turned to the two agents. Get out, he said. They didn't argue. They had delivered their half-confession. They had given just enough to protect themselves. The door closed behind them without sound. Inside, the harmonizer flickered again. Elian reached for it, fingers trembling, and tapped 3 notes. A warning, a location, a promise. We will go to them, she said, but not just to save. To speak, to sing, so no one can ever pretend we didn't exist. Kellen nodded, his voice a whisper now. Then we make it known. And as the stars waited beyond the station walls, 2 beings, one broken, one tired, prepared to become the chorus of a forgotten world. Asterisk. The ship they fled in was small, patchworked with stories from a dozen worlds, paint scuffed, engine panels held by prayer and wire, its name barely visible across the hull. Juniper's shadow. It was not built for battle, not carved for glory. But it moved like something that wanted to survive. Elian sat in the co-pilot seat, legs drawn close, eyes wide open to the stars stretching around them like the skin of some sleeping beast. Kellen flew with one hand on the console, the other close to the emergency brake. Neither of them spoke for a while, as if afraid that words would make their direction real, but the silence didn't last. Elian leaned forward, her voice soft but no longer cracked. The coordinates, they lead to a processing station, not a prison, a reclamation node. She paused. They call it Echo Nest. My people called it Shathfaran, the place of echoing hearts. Kellen's fingers clenched on the controls. Reclamation? He knew what that meant in corporate language. It meant repurposing, rewriting, rebuilding something into something else. Slavery, mind stripping, data harvesting, whatever they wanted. Are they still alive? They were, she said. 2 cycles ago. The words struck like ice water down his spine. 2 cycles. That wasn't long, but in the hands of the syndicate, even a day was enough to erase a soul. Why risk telling me? Why give you the coordinates if they could just kill them quietly? Elian turned her face toward the starfield. Her skin caught, the light like molten bronze, radiant and scarred. Because they thought I wouldn't dare go? Because they think you won't either? He didn't answer right away. His mind flashed with memories, outposts abandoned under orbital siege, rescue attempts that turned to graves, names carved into the hulls of refugee ships. But her gaze met his unflinching. She wasn't asking him to die for her. She was asking him to stand with her. And that changed everything. When they reached the outer ring of the Echo Nest, it loomed like a wound in space. Black metal spidered with light, surrounded by fractured satellites and old signal buoys. Its defenses were subtle cloaked turrets, sensor disruptors, even gravity fields that mimicked solar anomalies. It had been designed to disappear from history while still feeding its masters. Kellen's systems began to jitter the moment they breached the perimeter. They're jamming scans, he muttered, visuals only. He dropped the ship into a shadow path between twin signal towers. Elian's fingers moved across the old harmonizer, sending a pulse-low, rhythmic, ancient. A code, not a frequency the station expected, but one the survivors might remember. If they were still whole, But then the station spoke. Unregistered vessel, this is restricted airspace. Disengage thrusters and prepare for boarding. You have violated Article 9 of the Quiet Commerce Act. Kellen scowled. Quiet commerce, he said bitterly. That's what they call what they did to your people? She answered with her hands adjusting the harmonizer, boosting the resonance. A second pulse. Stronger. A scream disguised as song, and then a reply, 3 tones, offbeat, shaking. Survivors, Elian whispered, but weak. Kellen gripped the throttle. We're getting in, one way or another. But before he could maneuver, the ship jolted. A tractor field had latched on not. A full lock, but enough to drag them. His eyes scanned for countermeasures, but the ship wasn't made for war. We won't last long if they open fire. They won't kill us, Elian said. Not until they silence me. He glanced at her. You've done this before? No, but I've seen it done, to others. He saw the fire in her now, not wild rage, but patient fury, the kind that waits for centuries if it must. What's the plan? Elian took a breath. We let them board. We get inside. And then I sing the truth where their walls are thinnest. That's not a plan, he said. That's a prayer. She looked at him with the calm of a storm. It's both. Moments later, they were pulled into a docking bay. Cold lights washed over the ship. Armored figures approached, faceless. Faceless and cruel in their efficiency. Kellen felt his pulse in his fingertips, but he didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for the HARMONIZR. As the ship's doors hissed open, Elian stood tall, regal even in worn cloth. The soldiers aimed weapons. Exit the vessel. Submit to biometric arrest. She stepped forward. No, she said, they froze not. From her defiance, but from the harmonizer's pulse, the song she unleashed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was layered, one note drawn from her childhood, one from her people's morning chant, one from the crystals that once sang through her mountains. The walls responded, trembling softly. The guards faltered. Kellen stepped beside her. We're not here to fight, we're here to reveal. The harmonizer amplified, broadcasting to the station's own signal grid. Within seconds, consoles blinked, doors unsealed. Hidden chambers began to breathe. The survivors, if they still had voice, were listening, and somewhere deep within the belly of that station, a whisper rose. Elian. She closed her eyes. We're coming, she whispered back. But the alarms had begun. They were not alone in the dark anymore. The air inside the echo nest felt hollow. Too sterile for life, yet layered with the echoes of something ancient and aching. Each hallway Kellen and Elian moved through seemed alive with flickering shadows, parts of the station resisting them, fighting back with silence and locked doors. But other parts welcomed them, responded to Elian's harmonizer, whispered. Back in lights that pulsed like hearts trying to remember how to beat, they had not expected to get this far. Kellen knew that. This place wasn't designed for invaders, it was designed to hide sins. But Elian was not just a survivor. She was a key. Her voice, her memories, her very presence seemed to shake the walls. Every note she sang stirred something. Long buried. Keep moving, he urged, scanning their path with a borrowed sensor pad. We're close to the central echo vault. That's where they store data and maybe the survivors? Elian's voice was low, but resolute. They won't be data much longer. But just as they rounded the final corner, the light changed. Red sirens didn't wail. That would have required honesty. Instead, the station exhaled, a hiss of pressure doors slamming shut, atmosphere shifting. They were sealed in. And from the corridor ahead, a figure stepped out, slow and confident, cloaked in smooth gray armor, unlike the others. A voice followed, metallic and amused. Elian of the HFY. I wondered if you'd try something foolish. You always were. Melodramatic. Elian froze, eyes narrowing. Varin. The man removed his helmet. Pale eyes, sharp as razors. Human, but the kind of human who worked for syndicate interests. The kind who smiled while entire species were tagged, boxed and erased. You remember me? He said with mock sorrow. Untouched. Kellen stepped between them. So, this was your project? Vern raised an eyebrow. Not mine. I'm merely the custodian. The vision belongs to the syndicate. Efficiency, harmony, purpose. Do you know what we've built here? A legacy of order. The chaos of the galaxy will drown itself. But we, he gestured to the walls, to the locked vaults. We create permanence. You mean slavery? Kellen spat. No, Vern said coldly. Slavery implies chaos. This is refinement. Elian's harmonizer began to glow, vibrating faintly against her chest. You killed my world. We saved it from extinction, Varen said. Its song lives on. We encoded it, harvested it. You're not a relic, Elian, you're a product. And now, you've broken containment. You'll be preserved again, but differently. Behind him, security shutters open like hungry mouths. Drones, 4 of them, armed, ready. Kellen looked at Elian. Do we run? No. Her voice was quiet. We stand. She stepped forward, harmonizer raised, Varn sighed. You think you'll awaken them all? The others? They're broken, weak. They don't remember who they were. You're shouting into a grave. I'm singing into soil, she said, and they will rise. And then she began. The song wasn't beautiful, in the way Kellen expected. It wasn't delicate or lyrical. It was raw, jagged. It carried the sound of broken stone and rivers weeping. It clawed at the edges of reality. A song of pain, of truth. The vault doors trembled. Vern shouted a command, and the drone surged forward. Kellen didn't hesitate. He threw himself toward the nearest one, knocking its aim wide with a shock baton. Sparks lit the air. Another drone fired, striking the wall beside Elian, but she didn't stop. She didn't even flinch. From the vaults. Something answered it. Started as a vibration, then a pulse. Then a hum low and fractured, like glass singing. Then voices, real ones. Elian. The survivors. 26 voices rising, fragile but rising. The drone staggered. The station's core systems buckled. No, Varn snarled. Override silenced them, but the system didn't obey. It couldn't, because the frequency Elian had unleashed was no longer contained. It was being carried by the walls, by the echoes themselves. The syndicate's stolen data had become the instrument of its undoing. Vern lunged at her, but Kellen was faster. He slammed into the man, fists swinging not with grace but with fury. They grappled. Baron's blade nicked Kellen's shoulder, searing heat into flesh, but Kellen didn't let go. You call this legacy? He gasped. It's a mausoleum. You're nothing, Vern hissed. Just a traveler. A failure. Kellen shoved him back, blood on his sleeve, eyes blazing. Then why did I come back? Behind him, the vault doors finally opened, and from them stepped survivors. Not all strong. Not all whole, but awake. And singing. Elian collapsed to her knees, tears spilling freely, now not from defeat, but from victory. Her people were rising, not with weapons, with voice. Vern stared at them, frozen, and then Elian spoke the words that ended it. We do not belong to you. We never did. The harmonizer gave one last chime, deep and resonant, and the echo nest began to fall silent, not with suppression. But peace. The echo nest no longer hummed with secrecy. It breathed now soft and warm, filled with the faint tones of song carried across metal and stone. The survivors moved through the corridors like phantoms reborn, blinking into the light after years buried in silence. Some held hands. Some wept. Others just stood still, touching the walls they had once feared, whispering thanks to the air itself, as if it had listened all along. Kellen leaned against the bulkhead near the main docking ring, a bandage pressed to his shoulder, the fabric stiff with blood but clean. He watched them pass, watched history unstitch itself from darkness. And in the middle of it all stood Elian. She did not look triumphant. She looked Holdad. The harmonizer no longer glowed. It rested quietly in her hand, like a stone returned to riverbed. Its job was done. Around her, the others had begun to hum not a song of sorrow this time, but something gentle, lifting, like the wind over morning water. It had no name. It didn't need one. It was simply alive. You sure you don't want to stay? Kellen asked softly, approaching her as the last echoes of the confrontation faded into memory. This place, they could rebuild it, make it right. A sanctuary. Elian looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that stopped time. Not sadness, not joy, something deeper. I don't want to stay in the place that was broken, she said, even if it's made beautiful again. That isn't my legacy. He nodded. He understood. Then what is? She turned her gaze to the window where stars drifted like forgotten stories. To tell it, to carry the truth, to remind every voice in this galaxy that we were not erased, that we chose. They walked together through the station, now unguarded. Vern had been taken restrained, not by violence, but by the very systems he thought he controlled. The station's core had archived his confessions, his orders, every whisper of exploitation, and Kellen had already uploaded it all to the outer beacons, where it would spread like wildfire through the networks that the Syndicate could never fully silence. He had no illusions. Justice would be slow, if it came at all. But the truth was out there now, And truth was the one thing stronger than walls. At the ship's loading ramp, Elian paused. Her people were boarding. 26 survivors, scarred, changed, but not defeated. They carried small bags of salvaged memory song crystals, torn garments, ancient stones engraved with lyrics only they could read. Kellen looked at them, then at her. Where will you go? She smiled faintly. To the place where the stars still remember our names. There is a system in the Orion Fold, quiet, untouched. The resonance there matches our ancestral key. We will plant what's left. We will sing it into the soil. We will become more than echoes. He nodded, heart heavy and full. You'll need a way to get there. She placed her hand gently on the juniper's shadow. With your ship, if you'll lend it. He laughed, shaking his head. Lend? No, you're the captain now. She studied him. And you, I'll stay. Make sure the message spreads. Make sure the syndicate knows they can't hide anymore. Someone has to carry the torch while you carry the roots. It wasn't goodbye. Not really, but it felt like a line drawn in the stars. She stepped forward, one hand on his cheek, her touch light as a feather, her voice barely a breath. You reminded me that not all cages are metal, and not all keys are power. Her eyes shimmered. Some are kindness. Some are memory. Some are simply being seen. He swallowed the lump in his throat. And you reminded me why we still fight. They didn't kiss. There was no need. What they shared was older than romance, deeper than war. It was the bond of two beings who had witnessed each other at their most broken and chose to stand beside one another anyway. As the ship lifted off, the survivors inside began to sing, not in grief, not in anger, but in renewal. A song that spoke of beginnings, of things lost and found again. And as it rose into the sky, the station's lights dimmed one final time, and then blinked in rhythm with the melody, as if the walls themselves had joined the chorus. Kellen stood alone, head tilted upward, and listened until the last note faded into the stars. In the records that followed, many debated the incident. Some called it a malfunction, others a rebellion. Some denied it ever happened, but across 1,000 systems, in quiet corners where people still believed in songs and stories, the tale lived on, of a girl who was taken and the human who said, she chooses. Not you.